Okay, the next very important aspect or very important keyword in SQL is something called as group by. So group by is something that lot of people, your data analysts, right? Your data analysts or data scientists, right? Even software engineers would want to use to understand about what is there in the data. Let's see a bunch of questions that we can ask about our IMDb data and a bunch of questions that we can answer using group by, right? So for example, let's take this, right? If I want to find the number of movies released per year, right? Because in my movies table, I have the year in which every movie is released. Imagine if I want to find out for every year how many movies have been released, like because we have data from I think 1888, how many movies are released in 1888, how many movies are released in 1889, so on and so forth in our database, right? How many movies are there? Here I want the number of movies. Here I want the number of movies in 1889. Now to achieve this, we cannot achieve it using the commands that we already have. So there is a very useful keyword called group by. Let me show you how it's done. Okay. So if you take this command here, right? So what do we have? We want to select year. We want to print the year column and we want count of year from movies. But here there is this very interesting aspect which is called group by year. So the way this works here, this is very important to understand how this works internally, right? So you have a table here, you have a column year, right? This is your table which is movies, right? This is your table movies. Within this table movies, you have the column year, right? When you say group by year, what happens? It will now, this table gets transformed in such a way that everything where the same year is present, let's assume 1888, 1889. So wherever the year is there, right, it gets grouped by year. So 1888. So all the rows which have 1888 will get grouped into a set, right? Similarly, so this table internally, this is what happens internally. We don't see that, right? So it creates an internal table for you, right? Okay, so let me just use a different sheet here so that it's better. So imagine we have this table, the original movies table, right? The original movies table with the year column, right? So the moment you say group by year, right? The moment we say group by year, the moment we say this, internally what happens here is it will group wherever the year is the same. For example, let's say row 1 and let's say row 2 have the same year. So let's assume both of them have the year, let's say 2001, right? So now what it will create is it will create the year. This is what happens internally, okay? For 2001, it will list down all the rows. It will have the information about all the rows that is present here. It will say that row 1, all the information in row 1 is present here. It says row 2 also has the same year. Let's assume row 10 also has the same year 2001. Right? So all the rows where the year is 2001 are grouped together. So on and so forth. Similarly, all the rows where you have year equals to 2000 would get grouped together. Right? So when you say group by year, what's happening is it is grouping all the rows which have the same value of the year. That's what is first happening. As soon as that happens, so look at our command now, right? Look at our command. So what are we saying here? We are saying group by year. So we grouped it by year. So from the movies table, we group it by year. After we group it by year, we want to find out, we want to print, because that's what select does. It prints the year column and it prints the count of year. Okay, now let's see what happens. So when I say print year, this year gets printed. So 2001 gets printed, similarly 2000 gets printed. Now when I say count year, this count will be run. This is very important. This count operation or aggregation operation will be run on the group. It will count how many rows are there here, right? If there are, let's say, 3 rows here for 2001. So it will print 2001, 3. 2000, let's assume there are 10 rows here, which have the same year of 2000. It will print 10 and so on and so forth. I hope this method, what is happening internally, I hope is clear. When you say group by year, internally, for this, all the rows which have the same year are first grouped together. After grouping together, right, when I say I want to print year and count year, right, it will print the year and count year. Count year basically says how many rows are there in each of those groups, right? So let's actually run this and see, just to be sure. Okay, now look at what's happening. So it literally printed, look at this, look at the output here. It literally printed for us the year 2002 and the number of movies that are there in year 2002. So the column name here is year, the column name here is count year, right? So group by is a very, very useful keyword which groups the rows. It groups the rows as per some column value that we choose, as per some column that we choose, and then on top of it we can apply these aggregation operators. Very, very powerful, very, very useful, especially if you're a data analyst or even for software engineers to understand. So for example, it's a very simple question, right? How many movies are there which have in our data set from 1912? We have 1332 movies. Makes a lot of sense. How many movies are there from 1999? Some 10,976 movies. This is very useful and very powerful information, right? So having said that, now let's go back and see a few more variations, right? So now look at this. Here we are doing exactly the same thing as previous. We are selecting year and count year from movies. After grouping it by year, all that I'm saying here is I'm saying order by year. Now in this, what happens is I'll get the same information that we got here. I'm getting the same information that we got here, but everything will be sorted by year. Okay, so let's see the output here so that you're completely convinced that it works, right? So this is good. Okay, so let's clear the screen. Okay, this is good. So now this thing is sorted by year, right? In 1888, I have only 2 movies in my data set. In 1890, I have 3 movies, right? Similarly, in 1898, I have 1000 movies, right? So this is sorted by year. Remember, this is sorted in ascending order by year. Very good, right? So because that's what is the command that we wrote. That's what is the SQL query that we wrote. We said very simply that we want to print the year and the number of movies that are there in the year, right, from the table movies by grouping it by year and order by year. Very simple. Now comes a small twist. Instead of this output, if I want a different output, which is, see here it is sorted by year in ascending order, 1888, 1890, 91, 92, so on and so forth. If I want this to be sorted by count year, by this count, so if I want this results to be sorted by the count or the number of movies in that year. If I want this type of output, what do I do? This is slightly tricky, right? So there we learn a very simple and beautiful hack called aliases. So let's see. We'll see an example so that it's clearer. Okay, let's look at this. Here I'm saying select year, count year. Now immediately after count year, I'm creating a new variable called year underscore count. So what this does is, this is called this year underscore count. This year underscore count is called an alias. So basically what I'm saying here is I'm renaming this variable, the output that you get after computing the count here, I'm renaming it as year underscore count. Now let's look at it. Let's look at how the whole thing will fit in, right? So what are we saying here? We want to select the year and the count year. Here, I'm just creating an alias, or I'm creating a new name. Alias means basically a new name, right? I'm creating a new name for count year as year underscore count. Here, all that I'm doing is I'm from movies group by year. Now, when it comes to order by, because now what do I want to order it by? I don't want to order it by year. I want to order it by the count. Because I've renamed or I've given an alias for count year as year count, I can use this name here. I can use this alias here. right? This is very interesting, right? This is one of the big use cases of aliases. We'll see more aliases. Alias in English basically means an alternative name, right? That's what in English, that's what it means. And that's what we're doing. Instead of calling it count year, because count is a keyword, right? You can't use this. If you said count year here, I mean, with capital count within brackets year, that won't work. Because count is an aggregation operator. You can't use an aggregation operator here in order by. That doesn't work. So I'm creating an alias for this aggregation operator variable called year underscore count, and I'm ordering by that. Okay, so now let's see the output. Let's actually run this. Okay, let's actually run this and see the output so that we are convinced that it's working. Now this is much better. Now look at this, right? What did we want? Now this is not sorted by year. This is sorted by year count. 2008 has the smallest amount of data, then 1893, 1888, so on and so forth. So if you notice, this is in ascending order. This whole thing is in ascending order, right? So now I know which year. If you ask me which year has the highest number of movies data in a database, it's 2002, where we have 12,056 movies data in our database. Because this is sorted in ascending order, right? And these are questions that data scientists or data analysts or even software engineers want to answer from time to time, right? So the important thing here is that this variable that we created is an alias for the count year. And we can use aliases in things like order by, right? That is the key aspect that we have to learn here. Very often, again, this is not very often, group bys are often used with aggregation operators like count, min, max, and sum. They're often used with that, right? There's also a very interesting thing about null values. So when you perform a group by, if this column has some null values, all the null values will form into one group. Null values will not be discarded, but all the null values will be treated as the same value. So if you're grouping columns that contain null values, all the null values get together. So you should always be careful about null values in SQL because it has some special meaning, right? Except that this is what group by does. We'll also learn how group by can be extended or how group by can be made more powerful using another keyword called having in the next video.